Hello and welcome to the Gaggle where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we are very fortunate to once again welcome back a regular guest of the Gaggle, Professor Mohammad Marandi from the University of Tehran, and obviously is the right person at the right time. So there's a sense of deja vu all over again. I seem to remember 2, 3 years ago, we three of us were here and we were discussing, well, what's going on in Iran? There are protests, and everybody, all the politicians in the Western world, particularly the politicians in the United Kingdom, but also in the United States, are very exciting, calling for the overthrow of the Tehran regime, expressing their solidarity with the protesters. And we've already had President Trump saying the United States is locked, loaded, and ready to go. So, naturally, we don't go very much by what the Western media have been explaining, but they have mumbled something about the decline in the value of the rial, the strike in the Grand Bazaar in Tehran. But please fill us in what's actually going on.
Sure. Well, yeah, every time there's some discontent in Iran, it is immediately labeled as a revolution and the end of the reign of the evil Ayatollahs, which I don't really ever understand. I mean, the president's not an Ayatollah, the Speaker of Parliament's not an Ayatollah, the cabinet there are no Ayatollahs in it, the in Parliament there are no Ayatollahs. But anyway, that's how it's labeled. And um, and so, you know, 3, 4 years ago, we had the same thing. We had this discussion, as you rightly pointed out. And back then, the one city after another was being liberated. If you listen to Western media and the online chatter by Zionists and the monarchists that are funded by the West, or the MEK terror groups that's funded by the West. But when you're sitting in Tehran, and you walk out the house and go down the street, go to a shop, drive around town, you don't see anything. I mean, if you have to know the neighborhood, or you have to actually be living in some particular neighborhood to see something, to see some unrest. And that time round, 3, 4 years ago, we had the death of Mahsa Amini, and it was rumored that she was beaten to death,
Yeah.
and so that created a lot of emotion. And then the police, as they are always slow, they gave the footage out 3 days later, which showed that she was fine and that no one touched her, and that she collapsed and she had a condition beforehand, but it was too late. So you had protests back then, much larger in number, not huge, but much larger than these tiny protests of these businessmen. And those were also peaceful. These were peaceful, those were peaceful. And then then you get the infiltration. And that infiltration, for the most part, is
Yeah.
guided.
Yeah.
And so, and Western journalists, like, whenever I tell them this, they say, no, no, this is all, the West doesn't do this sort of thing. And which no one believes, but even we do it. I mean, if you've been following the news in Israel over the past year or so, they've constantly, and especially after the war, they've constantly been saying, we've arrested this person who's been spying for Iran. We've arrested that. Well, how does it work? Probably, I don't know. I don't work for the Iranian government, but probably the Iranians are using social media. They pay these people with Bitcoin or something like that, and they tell them what they want, and that's exactly what the Americans and the Israelis and the Europeans are doing against Iran and some regional countries too, which
Mhm.
try to play both sides, or try to pretend they're on both sides, but they're usually on the side of the Americans. Whether it's Turkey or Qatar or the Emirates or Saudi Arabia, ultimately at the end of the day, they're working with Americans. But in any case, this time round, the protests were about the decline in the real. It wasn't a catastrophic decline, because we've had regular declines for 40 some years, because we've had a sanction regime for well over 4 decades, almost 5 decades now, which has increased, would increase rapidly under Obama People always think it's Trump. It was Obama who actually first started the maximum pressure sanctions. That was a term that his administration had coined, and he called them crippling sanctions. So he wanted to cripple ordinary Iranians, which is barbaric, but that's what Obama was. And that's why whenever people say Trump is really evil, I mean, I always say, yeah, he is very evil, but he's no different from the others. He's just more, crude in the
Yeah.
way in
I
which he
mean,
displays it.
take a look at Responsible Statecraft has a very interesting piece about comparing Trump's foreign policy to Bush Cheney. It doesn't really matter to me who's in the White House, okay, when you're on the receiving end. It's interesting, going back to George's original observation is that we in Mar-a-Lago, and I want to talk about the Netanyahu visit because I think the perception of protests in Iran, and then Netanyahu. It's all tied together. It's crudely choreographed, but it's all tied together. He's quoted in saying, and I don't have it in front of me, all we have to do is kick in the door. And I just thought, how many times are you going to hear this in history? Okay. The Nazis, yeah. All you have to do is kick in the door and the Soviet Union will collapse. Oh, ruble to rubble. Well, just kick
Problem.
in the door. And now we're just seeing exactly the same. But this is not the first time with Iran. Also, it's cannon fodder for what Netanyahu wants to get Trump involved in this new year. So yeah, the people want to be liberated. The economy is crashing. We're going to save this. But that's how it's being reported in the British media and in the American media.
Well, because the British and American media they are controlled by the state. I mean, those pretenses of the past that the media was the fourth estate, and that for those of us who live outside the United States and have been on the receiving end of the empire, we've always known that whoever launches the missile in the United States is going to be supported by everyone in the media. Remember when Trump first fired missiles at Syria, then suddenly they said that Trump has finally become the president of the United States and that we're guided by the beauty of our missiles, whatever that means.
Whatever
That, it doesn't matter. So the media and the British, the Americans, the Europeans, they're all going to support this. If you recall, and I'm sure you do, when the Israeli regime carried out the attack on Iran, Europe supported it. And the German chancellor, who was the one who gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons to use against us, and I survived two chemical attacks. The German chancellor said, the Israelis do our dirty work for us.
What he said.
And,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, just like Saddam Hussein did their dirty work for them and for his government in particular. And of course, my cough, by the way, has nothing to do with chemical weapons. But anyway, so. But I agree with the point that you made. This is all linked. The Netanyahu going to the United States and having his love fest over the New Year holiday with Trump. This is very much linked to what operations are carried out in Iran. I don't mean to say, by the way, that everyone who carries out violence among the rioters, they are part of this. But the core of this is organized, and they get their orders from abroad. They often don't even know each other. They're told to meet people certain places, but they don't know who these people are. And they get acquainted during the operation. Now, whether that operation is to carry out an attack on a government building or police station, or to break windows in the market and to intimidate shop owners to shut their shops, that it depends. But they're organized from outside of Iran. They're funded. It's clear. It's quite clear. And
But
they try to use issues that can be exploited. So in certain parts of the country where you have different tribal groups or minorities or or for example, economic issues or social issues, they'll use what they can find to exploit to see if they can make uh, as much as much cause as much trouble as possible.
But just a question, and because for people who really aren't very familiar with the internal politics of Iran. The Grand Bazaar in Tehran, I mean, it's always described in the media, oh, well, they're very close to the regime. And so they're somehow are involved in now in negotiations with the president. What does that mean? I mean, are they what's their standing? I mean, obviously they're unhappy about the decline in the real. They're unhappy about trading in a situation where currency in the situation where there's currency fluctuation. But are they close to the regime? I mean, who exactly are they?
Well, I wouldn't use regime because regime is a sort of
Okay,
derogatory
okay,
term
the government.
used by the West, to
Okay.
say that it's
Well, I
unstable.
think George was
Yeah, I
phrasing
know.
Yeah,
Western
I was
media.
quoting more the
Yeah,
media,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah,
I
okay,
know.
okay,
I mean,
yeah,
George is, one of the evil ones too. So,
exactly.
the Grand Bazaar is not as important as it was when I was a kid. I mean, Tehran has grown much bigger, and businesses are spread out across a very big city. Tourists who come to Iran still go to the Grand Bazaar, and it is an important place for business. I'm just speaking in relative terms. But what the problem is for the government is that when the currency, and you know this better than I, when the currency declines, or if there's any major shifts in currency up or down, it creates an instability that makes doing business dangerous because you may buy something and then you can no longer sell it. But if you sell it and you don't have enough money to buy a new product because the prices may have gone up, and that can destroy businesses. So these
Mhm.
people who were angry and protested, and it was a peaceful protest, they were afraid of, for their own livelihood, which is a legitimate concern, and the government has to solve this. Now, part of the problem in Iran is that a big part is the sanctions, and the U.S. and the West wants to destroy the Iranian economy. And it's interesting that Trump is targeting ordinary Iranians, and then he speaks about, he speaks as if he's concerned about Iranians. The whole maximum pressure sanctions is about killing people and to prevent medicine from coming in, to raise prices, to destroy families, and create joblessness and create misery in society. That's the whole objective. Whether it's in Iran or Cuba or Venezuela or Russia, that's always the just like the tariff war. It's done to create misery in China. The problem is that Trump, you know, found out ultimately that he's causing more misery for the United States than China. But in any case, that aside, that is a big issue. And Iran is dealing with it. I mean, Iran is gradually moving out of isolation. BRICS, using alternative means for business with China, with Russia, and other countries in the years to come is going to make U.S. sanctions increasingly less effective. But one big problem that Iran has at home is that Iran has a subsidy issue. Gasoline in Iran is, for me, when I use my card, uh, I have uh, every Iranian that has a car can have gasoline for 1 cent a liter. And I usually don't use my card, my allowance. I don't finish my allowance. So I'm always using 1 cent a liter. And the expensive gasoline, there are three rates now. The expensive gasoline is like 3 cents a liter. So if you finish your allowance and you go to the north of Iran for your weekend vacations, wealthy people do, and they're the ones who use the subsidies more than anyone else. They use the 3 cents a liter. So obviously the government, and we have heavy subsidies for electricity, for natural gas. Everyone in Iran has natural gas. All homes in all cities have natural gas, and of course electricity too. And even water is subsidized. And we have a water shortage in Tehran, but it's still subsidized. Anyway, the government is a part of the reason why they have to print money and the currency goes down is because they have to pay for the subsidies.
Yeah.
Because that, one gasoline for the government, even for Iran, which produces gasoline and has its own oil, it costs a lot more than a few cents a liter. So the government has to print money for all these subsidies, and the subsidies benefit the rich more than they benefit the poor. I'm not against subsidies in general, but they have to be targeted and smart. And I believe, and ultimately the government has to remove some of these subsidies to decrease consumption so that the wealthy pay for their gasoline. And then you redirect that money towards building infrastructure, towards helping the more.
Well, so you're saying these subsidies means based, or is it universal?
No, no, they're universal.
Okay,
Everyone in
okay,
Iran who
well,
has
no
a
wonder
car.
you have this problem.
Yes. And they say we have electricity shortages also. Why? Not because we have a shortage of electricity. We have huge consumption. And then people illegally try to use this electricity for Bitcoin because the electricity is dirt cheap. And then what do? They're putting a lot of pressure on the electricity, the supply. So these subsidies are partially what are causing the periodical devaluation of the real. But the government, which has initiated a reform for energy, which is a good thing, President Raisi was going to do it, and then he passed, and then he died. And now the current administration is doing it. If it's done in the right way, and the subsidies, the money that comes from the subsidies are immediately redirected towards the disenfranchised, the lower middle class, the working class, developing, these neighborhoods and, adding and making as the prices go up, they give money to these parts of society to make up for it. Then this, I think, will solve a lot of problems in the next 2, 3 years.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, George and I have been seeing all these articles in the last few days. What you just said is never mentioned. I just didn't know. Okay, no surprise there. Um,
But
one of
it's
the
but it's going to be a big challenge because obviously every time the government raises the price of fuel, then you're going to see people unhappy. So they have to be very careful how they do
yeah,
it. But
yeah,
the
but
problem is that unless you reform the system, and I'm not an economist, you're going to keep having to pay and print money for the subsidies. And then you're going to have a further decline in the real.
well,
Again,
I mean,
I'm
the
I'm
way
I'm I'm not an economist, and an economist who listens in could say 1,000 things about what I'm saying, but in general, the system has to be reformed, and the government is, I think, the intention of the government is to is I think their intentions are good. I think their intentions are definitely good, but I think the general direction that they want to move towards is good. Although some are criticizing the government and saying this is bad for the poor, but
yeah.
I don't think that that's the intention. I think it's the other way around if it's done well.
Yeah, but the way it's portrayed is that these angry business people and other elements of society want a forced regime change, which, from what you're telling me, that has nothing to do with anything. Yeah, economic distress makes people angry by definition. Okay, and we see it all over the world. But it doesn't mean there's going to be a forced regime change, or you are inviting an outside party to bomb your country, like we have this hoaxer Nobel Prize winner in Venezuela. It's good at foreign policy a little bit. This whole story about Somaliland is really quite interesting to me. Can you what's the perspective from where you are, what this all means?
Well, just before I go there, yeah, I think it's just like with Russia. I mean, it's the same thing. Russia, when they were running out of missiles, you were handing over your washing machines, I think, to the government, and they're you know that
It got so extreme is that there is no toilet paper apparently in Russia.
and of course you have no gasoline either, thanks
Yeah.
to
Well,
the
the same explanation is that yes, in a couple of places there were people had to line up for petrol, but it was a logistics problem. It wasn't a supply problem. It was a screw up in logistics and reapportioning and redirecting supply, but it had nothing to do about shortage. There was no shortage
Yeah, so
at
like for
all.
example, if they say there's this riot in Tehran. Let's say there was a riot I mean, it's like in, let's say Moscow, there's a riot you're not going to see the riot. It's a city of 10, 15 million. Like and then they make it seem as if the whole city or the whole country is in uproar, which, people are driving around minding their own business.
To be honest, I thought that the videos of the riots were kind of unimpressive. So, oh, here's a video of the riot. I think, okay, I just see a few people milling around. I don't see large, angry mobs.
Despite AI, they were using AI
Yeah,
and they're also using old footage, but despite all that and manipulation, but yeah, it's not been very impressive.
yeah, yeah. Anyway,
But
could you go
going back to
on?
Somaliland, one of the issues is, and some people say that, some of my Turkish friends and some of my friends on the other side of the Persian Gulf say you're very harsh. But I say what I believe is correct. Turkey, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, the Emirates, Jordan, all of these countries are in the American camp. There's, no doubt about it. They may not like each other, but they're in the American camp. Like the Emirates and the Turks and the government and the Emirati regime and Erdogan, they don't like each other. They don't like the Brotherhood. They don't like Qatar, but they're both in the American camp. And we saw that, how Trump treats the Qataris, how he speaks about Erdogan. Erdogan, just a couple of days ago, Trump said, Erdogan helped bring, played a key role in bringing down Syria, which is a good thing. And Netanyahu agrees. There, so, or, Trump, so all of these countries are in the American camp, but the UAE and Israel have a special relationship.
Very special. Yeah.
Yes.
They're dating each other. You know that, right?
Yes. Yes. And so a lot of what the UAE does is very much in coordination with the Israeli regime, whether it's in southern Yemen, whether it's in Somalia, whether it's in Sudan or elsewhere. So for example, in the case of southern Yemen, we see that tensions are growing between Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and that Saudi Arabia is now pushing back. And I heard that today again the Saudis carried out an airstrike. I'm not sure. Someone told me right before the show. Um, I'll have to look later. But the Emirates are moving in that direction. And in general, our region, although it's in the American camp, it's becoming more afraid of the Israeli regime. The foolishness of Turkey and Qatar and the others in overthrowing Syria has made them more vulnerable to the Israeli regime.
Yeah.
Erdogan thought he's going to expand and create some sort of mini Ottoman Empire, but the United States is with Israel. It's not going, if there's any conflict between Israel and Turkey, then the United States is with Israel. And Turkey is not Iran. If the United States pulls the plug, the economy collapses, and Erdogan will be in big trouble. We saw that when he arrested that pastor who they said was involved in the coup, when Trump in his first term, threatened Erdogan, the economy went haywire, and then he immediately
Well,
handed
they
everything
shorted
over.
the currency.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And he handed over the pastor. So the region is becoming more concerned about Israel, which is a good thing for Iran. Not that they're all suddenly hugging Iran and kissing Iran, but for them to be more concerned is a good thing. Erdogan is planning to come to Iran. He recognizes that he needs Iran. He's been conspiring. He and Qatar have been stabbing Iran and the resistance in the back for a very long time, but now he's in trouble. The region is therefore moving in one direction, but the UAE is still moving in the opposite direction. And so the UAE and Israel want to see Somaliland as a separate country because it will be their foothold.
Yeah.
Just like They have a similar interest in Sudan, and they have a similar interest in southern Yemen. But we're already, as I said, seeing pushback, both politically with regards to Somalia, but also militarily when it comes to southern Yemen. And so I don't think actually the Emiratis are being very smart. I think they've pushed too far. And with the new especially after the airstrike or the drone strike, I don't know which it is, on Qatar, this new fear and concern about Israel and after Syria, because the Israelis obviously are the ones with the upper hand in Syria. I saw a clip, and I don't know if you've seen this, and no one has, I posted it, and no one has actually uh, said anything to counter this, to say that no, this is out of context or something. Of course, I got it from someone else, but the Turkish foreign minister went to um, Damascus, and he began talking about Palestine, and it was a joint press conference with the Syrian regime's foreign minister, the Al-Qaeda foreign minister, and they cut him off and ended the press conference. And I think that just shows where the power lies in Damascus and how Damascus is going to be obedient to the United States. And in my opinion, Jolani was their man in Syria from the very start.
Yeah.
The Petraeus love fest with him. He was in Petraeus's prison. He knows very well who he is. And then playing basketball with the head of CENTCOM, and then going to the White House through the back door with that bizarre meeting with Trump and the perfume and all that.
Perfume.
It's clear where the power lies. And now the Israeli regime is creating an alliance with Greece and Cyprus, which is shameful. I mean, it's disgusting. I mean, regardless of whose side one is on with regards to Cyprus and North Cyprus and South, but to have an alliance with this genocidal regime is absolutely disgusting. But in any case, in my opinion, the Israeli regime and the Emirates are not in a strong position. And although in Western media they pretend as if they are, I actually think that the last over 2 years has been disastrous for Israel. They may have won some tactical victories here and there, especially in Syria, but I think strategically they're the big losers. And I think the same is true with the Emirates. By the way, while in the past, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates were the ones who were pushing Wahhabism and Salafism and these Takfiri groups across the world. And they began in Afghanistan, and then they went to, uh, the West used them elsewhere. Later on, it was the Qataris and the Turks under Erdogan, Turkey under Erdogan, that began promoting these Takfiris. So, the ISIS and Al Qaeda and Jaish al-Islam and I don't know Boko Haram and their ideology comes from here. But in the case of the Emirates, Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman has sort of moved away from this ideology, which is a good thing. I mean, anyway. But the Emirates, their role is very different. It's no longer ideological. They're no longer promoting these ideologies, but uh, they are very much allied with the Israeli regime, and the Emirates is the center for money in
Well, their lobbying in the U.S. is only second to Israel. I mean,
absolutely.
very
And
powerful lobby.
and all the drug money from Afghanistan and elsewhere, it goes through Emirati banks. It goes through the Emirates. The blood money in Africa. I mean, what are all these wars in Africa for the most part? They're about control. So you have while people are killing each other, you have these companies going into Africa, taking the gold, taking, the minerals and all that. That money, that gold from Sudan, it goes to the Emirates. The money in the Horn of Africa goes to banks in the Emirates. So the Emirates have a huge financial interest in what is going on and in these dirty wars and in these massacres. The Israelis, of course, have their own interests, which we all know. But in any case, they are very close to each other. As you said, they're dating. If it's not, I mean, if the Emirates is not already the mistress, they are at least dating.
But it's very interesting because, in a way, public opinion has indeed shifted on the Emirates, particularly on the question of Sudan. And there's now a lot of very
Yeah.
negative coverage about the Emirates, precisely on the issue of Sudan. All the horrors and massacres that are taking place in Sudan is directly attributable to the Emirates. So that's very interesting. So they used to get a very good press. They're not getting a good press anymore. But just to return to Peter's question, what do they need Somaliland for? What's the purpose of it?
Well,
Why rushing
George,
in to recognize it?
the push against the Emirates, the first thing that always pops in my head when I'm reading stuff like that, you're not talking about Israel. You're talking about an
No,
Arab
that's fair
country.
enough. Yeah, I agree.
That works not, that's very subtle there.
And particularly with Qatar, that's the
Yeah,
Qatar is the one that
exactly,
they always, yeah.
exactly.
Like, hey, let's not talk about Israel. Let's talk about Qatar.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And by the way, the Emirates has a lot more money than Qatar does. I mean, Turkey gets a lot of help from Qatar, and the dirty war in Syria was largely funded by Qatar. And then Al Jazeera, of course, was a tool to undermine Syria. But the Emirates has much more money. And the money comes from these sources that I explained. I mean, the drug money in Afghanistan, I think, is probably more than anything else. And it has a huge influence. But Somaliland is very strategically located, and the Red Sea is, of course, a contested zone. Right now, Ansarullah and the Yemeni armed forces, they've shown that without their consent, the Israelis and the United States cannot, and the Europeans cannot use the Red Sea. And even though the Americans imposed a war, they failed and ultimately backed down. But if this territory is used by the Emiratis and the Israelis, then it could be a launching pad for strikes on Yemen. They can create a lot of death and destruction more easily in Yemen. They could more swiftly respond to missile strikes from Yemen or drone launches from Yemen. And that is one, that is, I think, a key reason. But ultimately, as I said, the Emirates is moving in the exact opposite direction as the rest of the region. Israel is becoming toxic, of course, and people across the region hate Israel. And you can be sure that Emiratis are very secretly and very quietly would agree. And and yet, the Emirati government is moving openly in the opposite direction. Not, I mean, I just heard that they're increasing the number of flights to Israel from Emirati airports. So I don't think this is going to end well. And
There's
I was always of this opinion that this will not end well, just like um, the policies of many of these dictatorships towards with regards to Israel, none of them are going to end well. The Arab Spring, and sorry for interrupting, Peter, the Arab Spring, when it happened, some young man burned himself alive in Tunisia,
yeah.
not even in the capital city, and then you saw government after government either fall or fall into crisis. No one expected it. The anger today, because of the economic situation across the board, is greater. The anger because of what's happened to Gaza is infinitely greater. So none of these regimes are safe. And the Emiratis, although it is a police state and they have very good control over everything, they check your cell phones, they check what your messages. My friends in the Emirates, they do not speak politics with me at all. Never, not a word of politics. Um, if you recall, during the siege on Qatar, and Iran saved Qatar, but then Qatar, as it was stabbing Iran in the back. After Iran saved it and the relationship with the Saudis normalized, they started stabbing Iran in the back again. But the Emirates, they said they passed a law of sorts where if you said anything good about Qatar, you would go to jail for, I think, 10 years and you'd pay a fine of $100,000. So, but in any case, these policies are dangerous because ultimately, if someone, let's say if Saudi Arabia begins to wobble for whatever reason, all of these countries would fall because they don't have popular legitimacy and the policies that they pursue are angering people, whether it's in Jordan or whether it's in Egypt or elsewhere. People are very upset. But since these are authoritarian states and since this West is backing them, and with the use of high tech capabilities, the populations are silent, but the anger is there. And by the way, just going back to something we said earlier, I mean, the protests in Iran, which are legitimate, the riots are not, but the protests in Iran, the riots aside, are infinitely smaller than what we see in Europe. But you know what?
Exactly. And also protest. Well, oh my goodness, protest is allowed in Iran. It's a dictatorship. You can't protest.
Yes,
It
exactly.
always bounces back on them here. Just for a nanosecond, we were talking about Somaliland and then you invoked Gaza. Is this a dumping ground for Palestinians?
Well, that is also, even though that apparently, and I don't know much about Somaliland, but apparently a lot of people in Somaliland in this area that is self-declared Somaliland are not happy with this.
I, well, well, it's like okay. I don't want to be dismissive or anything, but this is like a tribe in that part of the
Yes,
country.
yes.
It's just
That's my
making a
understanding.
deal.
Yeah.
That's my understanding, and there is no popular support for that. It's a couple of individuals that have garnered power, maybe through the illegitimate use of force. I don't know, but
And
I
also
mean,
money. Money.
well, yeah,
You have
money
enough,
gets
yeah.
money does get people's attention. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, I had a guest on my program many years ago, and he tried to recruit me. In a way, his name Dyke, Dan Diker, and it's all over the Twitter right now. And he basically he never said dumping ground, but he obviously that's what he meant. Okay,
They
and
deny it, but that is what is being
he
said.
didn't deny it. Yeah. Well, no, he said, well, yeah, well,
No,
those
no,
are
I'm saying
different.
Somaliland denies it.
Oh,
But
okay. Oh,
but
okay.
people are saying no, this is what they're after.
Mhm.
What other reasons? I mean there are other reasons, as I said, it's a good way to strike Yemen. But the second good reason to have a Somaliland would be to dump the people of Gaza. And you saw Trump say just a couple of days ago that he heard that half of the Palestinians in Gaza, if they could leave, they would.
Yeah, well, he also said that he's brought peace to the Middle East the first time in 3,000 years. Okay.
Right. But now, sort of, since we're talking about Gaza, how do you see the
Yeah.
um, the immediate situation? We're supposed to be implementing phase two. We keep talking about phase two. But as far as the Trump administration is concerned, even though they have that plan, it's their plan, the 20-point plan. Trump seems to understand phase two as being nothing more than the disarmament of Hamas. Hamas isn't going to disarm without, putting in some kind of political institutions in place, which is the other parts of phase two. So, how do you see what's going to happen now?
Well, that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to be moving on to phase two for a very long
Yeah,
time.
like we're moving towards a Palestinian state. You know, we had been
Exactly.
my entire life, we've been moving towards that. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
just like the two-state solution. From the very beginning, it was a lie. And no, everyone knew that the Israelis under the different governments, it never intended to give up the West Bank. And Western European governments who are always talking about the two-state solution, they were just buying time for Israel. Just like, well, sort of similar to the the peace accords between over Ukraine's the Minsk Accords. We later heard that from the former Chancellor of Germany and the former President of France, Hollande, and that that they never intended to have real peace, and this was to buy time. Merkel said it actually first. But in any case, the two-state solution was never about really bringing about a
Yeah,
Palestinian
but I
state.
mean, but George asks a really very serious and actually horrifying question. What is going to happen to Gaza?
War. I think ultimately there will be war again. There will be genocide. I don't see peace in this region. But the thing is, Peter, that uh and I have a I have difficulty sort of saying this because I don't know if I if I'm understood well or if I'm even right. But I think the genocide has destroyed the Israeli regime, its reputation across the world. It's illegitimate in the eyes of so many people, and even the mood in the United States has changed, which I never thought would happen in my lifetime. But once you slow down the genocide, it hasn't stopped, obviously, and then you restart it again. I think the outrage is going to be even greater because now, even though it hasn't stopped, and a lot of people think it stopped, or at least it's no longer in your face every day. And then you say, well, at least this problem's gone away now. It hasn't, and people are starving, and they're dying of, infants are dying of cold. We all know that. But what I mean is that for the ordinary people who are walking around on the streets, checking their cell phones, it's not very much there anymore. If this restarts, I think it's going to be much worse for the Israeli regime. And because the world has already turned against it, and people are going to say, "We thought this was over." Now they're killing them again. It's not a price that the Israeli regime can pay, and it is going to hurt it in a way in which it has never been hurt before. And you already see the people out there that are speaking against the Israeli regime in the United States, not
Yeah,
just in the left anymore,
yeah.
and not just among independents those who supported the Democrats, anti-Israel. Among Israeli hardcore supporters on the right, you see war. Whether it's Candace Owens or whether it's Tucker Carlson or even Steve Bannon or what's her name, the lady of
Laura Loomer or
no,
what?
no, 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 the one who's now being attacked for being remaining friendly to
Marjorie
Oh,
Taylor
there's so
Greene.
many Megan
no,
Marjorie
no, no,
Taylor
Kelly.
the
Greene.
one Megyn Kelly, yeah, the one who
Megyn
came
Kelly.
in
Okay.
Moscow. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
well,
even these,
she can't burn both ends of the
yeah,
candle. She realizes it. I mean, she's destroying herself. You
absolutely.
watch it in real time. We're watching you disintegrate in front
But
of
the
our eyes.
point is that things are not good for the Israelis. I mean, obviously, in Washington, in Congress, in the Senate, in the White House, they're in charge. I mean, Trump spent his New Year with his brother in arms, but the United States is changing. So I think that Netanyahu and the Israeli regime are in a very dangerous place. I'm not saying that if they start a war that the regime would collapse, but what I'm saying is that the price that they'll pay, it will be very high, and they won't be able to take Gaza. There's no doubt about it. And Hamas is preparing itself, and I have no doubt that Iran is giving them whatever they need, and their allies, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah is preparing itself, Yemen is preparing. Everyone is preparing for war. And of course, it will be the Israelis, as usual, who start wars, and it will be the Americans who start wars because that's what they do. They're the aggressors, but they're the good guys at the same time, according to the Western narrative. But I don't think this is going to
Well,
just
it's
go. I
interesting.
don't think it's going to stay this way. It ultimately something is going to have to give.
I
If
think
we
it's
can go
also,
back,
so sorry, just Peter, just to
go
follow
ahead,
up
George.
on,
Go ahead.
because it's also striking that even among when you're thinking about the 2028 election, I don't think any of the sort of fanatical pro-Israeli supporters they have any real standing. I mean, it's like when you look at the polls, Ted
Exactly.
Cruz, who is kind of one of the big Israel boosters, he's about 0.5%, 0.5%. He used to be a major figure in the Republican Party. He's at 0.5%. So I think the
He's done.
competition, exactly, the
He's
competition
done.
will be among the candidates who will hey, what are you going to do to restrain Israel? I think that's going to be
Well,
the
well,
theme of.
J.D. Vance, he has an important card to play. They humiliated me when I was at. That has traction.
Yeah.
Adjacent to what George just said, and I don't know how much you followed what's going on with Turning Point USA. I never even paid attention to it until the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Seriously, I knew it existed, but I never thought about it. I have a thesis about this. The as they say in American or in the alternative media, the Zionist billionaires, if they can't control Turning Point, they will destroy it, and they're in the process of destroying it because it is the only vast national organization on the right that can be mobilized. They're
For
losing
the
it,
youth, yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think that this I don't know how many different levels of deception there are here, but if they can't control it, they're going to destroy it. Okay. Because it's too powerful in an organization. I wasn't a fan of Charlie Cook, Kirk. Don't misunderstand me here. I'm trying to be objective in observing what he had created. But these the American Zionists, if they can't control this huge organization with motivated people, I mean, people actually want to go to these things, okay? If they can't control it, they will destroy it, and we're watching it being destroyed.
Yeah, they're just they've already, I think, destroyed it by
Yeah.
pushing it in a direction where people are seeing that the new head, Charlie Kirk's
Yeah.
wife, is almost the exact, not well, not
When she came out
she's
and said
almost the
Shalom
exact
Sabah,
opposite of what we're being told Charlie Kirk was in the last few weeks.
yeah.
Right? Now, again, I don't want to even speak about Charlie Kirk. I don't know him that well. I've seen a lot of nasty things that he said, and but anyway, he's dead. But his the way in which she's conducted herself and the people around her have conducted herself, they are pushing her and the organization to self-destruct. They don't want it to be destroyed, but they're pushing it towards destruction. And I don't think it's going to be of great relevance in future. And that is, of course, the long-term danger for the Israeli regime, because now they are going to be completely reliant on money. They're going to be completely reliant on manipulation. And young people in the United States who've seen the genocide, you can take away TikTok, but you can't take away the memories of the that kids. And the more they take away their freedom to gather information, and the more they're open about taking over, whether it's CBS or TikTok or other.
Yeah, they're calling it ZBS now. Very
Yes, exactly.
But that's the thing with Israel is totally dependent on the United States. I mean, it doesn't matter about the Europeans, it doesn't, who cares what they say, but it's the United States. And if the United States turns against Israel, then I think Israel is done. And I think that's
Yeah, but I
why.
don't think it's something overnight, because at the end of the day, you have money, and and these people, if they pour in a lot of money, they can still probably get, but it's going to gradually change. It may not change overnight, but things are changing. And by the
Oh,
way,
and
well, and even in Europe, by the way, Europe is important, but things could actually move in the opposite direction in some ways. For example, a lot of the extreme, like for example, in the UK, if there's an election, right now forces that are very close to Israel will come to power, even though sentiment in the country is anti-Israel. So you have this sort of these paradoxes. In Latin America, a lot of people are very critical of Israel, but you do see governments coming to power that are,
yeah, but see, but this the Zionist project. One of its derivatives is the destruction of Western democracy for the very reason that you just cited. Is that how do you get people in power that are completely at odds with the popular will? I mean, we see this all the time, and we watch these leaders. They humiliate themselves. They humiliate themselves. And it's worth humiliating yourself for whatever reason, money or whatever you get after you leave power. I don't know. But you don't have to be politically literate to see this is wrong. This is absolutely wrong.
But
And
I
Yeah.
agree. But I
And I
think
also would say, I agree. I'm just saying that there'll be a lot of hiccups on the way,
oh,
but they're going downhill very fast.
that's right. But that's why I think that in the United States it's a little different. I think there's more of the kind of public accountability in the United States than there is in Europe, and that's why I think it's going to manifest itself in the U.S. political system much faster than
yeah.
anywhere else. I think it's J.D. Vance. I think it's looking like he will be the nominee. He is going to come under a lot of pressure, essentially, to start distancing himself from Israel. Anyone who starts mouthing our greatest ally and all the rest used to be the Republican Party boilerplate. They have no chance whatsoever. So I think
And if
it's
you
already changing much more rapidly in the United States than anywhere else.
and this Randy Fine character,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
oh my, I mean, again, you don't have to be politically sophisticated, and you see, how do you sleep at night? And they put a dead child, an infant, and he says, I sleep just fine. I mean, you don't have to be politically sophisticated to be find that abhorrent, okay? And I'm speaking the obvious here. 3 years ago, this was verboten. You could not talk like
He
this.
almost lost his own seat, which is a very safe Republican district. I mean, he almost lost. I mean, they had to pull out all the stops to get him over the finish line. That's how unpopular he was in his own district.
Yeah, we are living in extraordinary times. I mean, it's very dangerous too with all that's going on. But also in addition to all this, you have the general decline of the West itself. So support for Israel in the West is on the decline. It's collapsed. And then you have economic decline and the decline of Western influence. And I think that in Ukraine, which will, as we, I think, all predicted from early on, that it would end in a decisive military victory, however that plays out. I think that's not going to be good for Israel either, because this is going to damage the EU, it's going to damage NATO, and it's going to hurt Trump immensely, even though he's trying to pretend that he has nothing to do with this. But this is going to be a big step in the decline of the West. And here I'm saying I'm saying something very dangerous because George probably knows a lot about this, and you too, Peter. But I think that if the Russians take Odessa, I don't know I don't know how the war will end, but if they take Odessa, I think the politics of Southeast Europe are going to change quite dramatically.
Well,
No, 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 irrespective of Odessa, um, the the accountability for this absolute catastrophic policy is good. There will be debts to pay.
okay.
Okay, because if we look, for example, the powerhouse, we can't even say the powerhouse of Europe anymore because Germany is in massive decline. I mean, the number of bankruptcies of small and medium-sized businesses it's extraordinary. The big ones are too big to fail at this point. Okay, the state will take care of them. But you see this all across the board. And for me, and this George and I talking endlessly about this, but I mean the self identity of these European leaders, this clique. They're invincible. They're righteous. They are the fulfillment of the highest level of human existence. We can go on and on. That will be shattered, shattered.
When they gave Saddam Hussein, they were giving him perfume, apparently.
But
Uh,
before we finish, what are
but
the
just to add to what Peter said, you know, 4 years ago, it was roughly 4 years ago when I went to Vienna for the nuclear negotiations. I was there in 2015 with Dr. Zarif, and then roughly 4 years ago with Dr. Balgari. The war started when went during the negotiations. I was like their media advisor, and I was meeting diplomats and politicians and journalists and whoever wants to meet me. One of the who I won't name, but you may know his name, but he's a very well-known journalist. He met me like 2 or 3 days after the war, 3 or 4 days after the war, early on after the war, because he was following up on the nuclear talks. And I said to him, "You guys need a deal." because uh, you know, the sanctions against Russia. I don't know if it was for a few days or a couple of weeks, but it was after the war, and it was when they were either they were talking, they were going to cut off the gas, or the sanctions regime had begun. And I said that you need a deal with Iran, and a European winter is approaching. You need Russian gas, you need Russian energy, you need trade with Russia, and it's not going to be there anymore. And what's your alternative? It's Iran. And they were saying, no, no, we're going to win this war in weeks. Not we, but the Russians will lose in weeks and Putin will be out. And he said this so more or less the same thing too. And I said, look, you've been trying to overthrow Iran for almost 5 decades, 4.5 decades back then, and you failed. Russia is bigger than Iran. And Russia has not been under the sort of sanctions like that Iran has been for like 20 years. So you're not going to win. But they were, because of that mentality that Peter was just explaining, they can't lose because I remember when the 2008 crisis happened, I think they asked Greenspan, well, why didn't you see this? He said, we didn't envisage this in our model or something like that. These people, they think, because Greenspan back then was treated like a god. And so these people think they're the gods, and these leaders in the West think they're the gods, and they can't lose because they're destined to victory. It is the end of history. They'll crush Russia, and Iran, of course, will collapse, and it will have regime change one of these days. And of course, China, the economy is going to collapse ultimately. Why? Because we're
Yeah.
good guys.
I always try to remind people, because so many people are historically illiterate. They asked me about the sanctions against Russia, and I said, well, the entire history of the Soviet Union was sanctioned, okay, and they survived that, okay. And and maybe this is obviously a difference separating Russia and Iran. I actually am for the sanctions because I want Russia to be cut off from the West in every respect. In
Ultimately,
respect.
in the long run, the losers of these sanctions will be the West. Because while Iran suffers, while Russians suffer, while everyone who faces, while Venezuela, people across the world suffer, if that's the objective, but it creates an incentive for them to look for alternatives. And Asia's on the rise. It's happening at a time when we should be turning away from the West and but because we are Eurocentric by nature, we've been brought up this way generation after generation, we still look to Germany. Even though we see Germany collapsing, if I want to, let's say, send my child abroad, well, I wouldn't, but many people, they still want to send their child to Germany. They won't send their child to China. Why? Because that's not how we view the world. But we have to be pushed by these people for us to explore the potential. The North-South corridor, but I think on the last show we discussed this. The North-South corridor between Iran and Russia is very important, but it should have been done decades ago. But
Yeah,
they didn't do it
absolutely.
because it
Absolutely.
wasn't a priority.
Absolutely.
You know, South-South cooperation or the global majority integration among these countries was never a priority.
Well,
The West is forcing us to do this,
for,
and this is the right way forward.
one of the things in my long tenure living here, this is my own personal observation, is that the Russians have to be pushed pretty hard to do the right thing. Okay. But they do the right thing.
Here
Okay.
too.
All right, but just before we finish, Bibi Netanyahu was in the Mar-a-Lago just a few days ago. Supposedly they were discussing possible strikes against Iran, a renewal of the war of June. What's the mood in Tehran? Is there an expectation that there's going to be a new war with Israel anytime soon?
I don't think anyone looks at it based on what Trump says. What Trump says doesn't matter because tomorrow he may say something very different. Then the day after he may say something even worse. Uh, the Iranians are planning for war. Whether there's war or not is irrelevant. They're planning for war. And the best way to stop war is to be prepared for war, obviously, as they say. But there are two things here. One is that if the Israeli regime attacks again, with, of course, full Western support, because aggression, when it comes from their side, is always good. The Iranians are going to hit back much harder, and they're much more prepared than before. And the Iranians will rally, as they did last time round. The second point is that if the Americans get involved, last time they just carried out a single strike. They said Trump said he obliterated the nuclear program, you know, apparently, but now he's speaking about it being rebuilt. How can you rebuild something that's been obliterated? But anyway, um, if Iran struck back and hit back hard in Qatar and destroyed key U.S. assets in the military base near Doha. But if the United States gets involved in a war with Iran, like an extent, I mean, they cannot invade the country. They just don't have the capability. And we're seeing already how things are playing out in Venezuela, which is not Iran. Although it's a big country and I have friends there, and uh, there are a lot of people who are willing to fight there, and they have mountains and they have forests. It's The Americans are not going to win. But Iran is 90 million people, 90 plus million people, and it's worse. It would be worse than Venezuela for the United States. But if the United States starts some air campaign against Iran, then Iran will, to be very blunt, Iran will go after its assets in the region. And these countries that host U.S. bases, which is everyone in the Persian Gulf, they would cease to exist. Taking out the Emirates or Qatar
Pretty
is a
easy.
day's work.
Yeah.
And these regimes, once the oil and gas are gone, you have like millions of indentured servants and semi-slaves. Who even knows if there will be Arab governments afterwards? Because so many people from South Asia and Southeast Asia
Yeah.
live there.
Yeah. The Emirates could be run by a Filipino. Who
Yeah,
knows?
who knows? So the price of energy would go through the roof. And of course, Russia would benefit hugely. But uh, the economies in the West would collapse. Now, some people say, well, the United States is self-sufficient in energy. The price, when it goes through the roof, and I have to pay for it when I get gasoline, it doesn't matter if my country produces oil or not. If the prices go up, the economy collapses. Yes, those who produce the oil, they're going to, for at least a couple of days before, or a couple of weeks before the economy collapses, they're going to make a lot of money. But ordinary people, are going to have to pay a huge amount of money for gasoline, and the economies will collapse. And then I think when people go after Trump, including the Israel firsters who love their gas guzzlers, as I said earlier to someone else, he will have to flee in his horse or uh, in his carriage or whatever it is.
But Israel wouldn't undertake this without American support. Basically, Israel isn't. They saw what happened in last June. They need the United States in its corner. So that's the only condition on which Israel would undertake this.
Yeah, and the assumption in Tehran is that if that Trump is not going to stand against Netanyahu. I mean, we saw the New Year's Eve. Uh, Someone can say that behind the scenes things are different. We don't, Trump is not very sane, and he's not predictable. So even if you know what's going on in his head, even if somehow the three of us have real inside access to what's going on there in the White House for 3 days, we know everything. On the fourth day, when we no longer have that access, who knows what he's going to be saying and doing?
Yeah, I mean, what George and I commented on it when it happened, when Mark Levine, this lunatic, I
Did you
mean,
see that
yeah,
the
but see, the whole BB sitting stuff with Trump, I don't take very seriously, because it's very much for public consumption. It's for his donors, and that's what that's all about.
absolutely.
But Mark Levine,
With
it
it,
was a very
kind of an
aggressive.
arm,
Yeah, it
headlock.
was.
I mean,
And then
You're
never
Trump
seen like
holding
a.
on to the
the
podium,
podium. Yeah, but that
not to
was
be swept away.
like that was a leash,
Yeah.
and it was a threat.
And Levine is not popular, but
No,
still he's
that's
obedient to
God,
Levine.
God,
He he
I
he
mean,
he has
he,
lost the war
well,
on
he's
the right.
lost his mind.
Of
yes,
course.
yeah, that's right, that's right. Well, Professor Marandi, this is a really fascinating conversation
And
again.
we got you first. We
And we
got you.
got you first, so we're going to post this, pronto. So thank you very much for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Look forward to speaking to you very soon. And if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.